Pentagon study Russia outgunning US in race for global influence. The US is ill-equipped to counter the increasingly brazen political warfare Russia is waging to undermine democracies, the Pentagon and independent strategists warn in a detailed assessment that happens to echo much bipartisan criticism of President Donald Trump's approach to Moscow. Its authors contend that disarray at home is hampering U.S. efforts to respond, saying America lacks the kind of compelling story it used to win the Cold War. The study doesn't offer any criticisms of Trump, but it comes amid continued buy-in both parties, who have objected to the president's repeated slights at U.S. alliances in end, public affection for authoritarian leaders like end, and his habit of the evidence that Russia interfered in the 2016 election. A grinning Trump, in interviews with Politico, other Russia watchers supported the report's warnings that the U.S. needs to up its game. The unclassified strategic multi-layer assessment marks a clear warning from the military establishment to civilian leaders about a national security threat that strategists fear, if left unchecked, could ultimately lead to armed conflict. In the Pentagon paper, which has not been widely disseminated, assesses Russia's intentions in an attempt to understand what drives its strategy, outlines a range of malign activities attributed to Russia in regions as diverse as Africa and the Arctic, and lays out ways the United States could strengthen its response. Among other steps, the study addresses what it refers to as Moscow's gray. These. Belinda Bragg, a research scientist for NSI, a government consulting firm that specializes in social science research, adds in the study that but that requires coming to an agreement about what the U.S. message should be, said Anna Brzezinskaya, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, who wrote a chapter about Russian efforts to win over both governments and opposition forces in Africa. We still have a story to tell, but because we are so polarized and are doubting ourselves, we have a narrative problem, Brzezinskaya said in an interview. Russia does not. Another crucial step, Bragg recommends, is to develop a better understanding of how much target populations trust the United States and. The paper also raises alarm about what the authors view as a burgeoning anti-American alliance by Russia and Communist China, who have traditionally been fierce competitors despite being on the same side of the Cold War's ideological divide. Steps to counter. On the other hand, the assessment sees an urgent need for cooperation with Russia in key areas, especially in the realm of nuclear weapons. Arquilla acknowledged that former President Barack Obama failed in his attempted reset with Russia failed, and that Trump still. The greatest check on Putin's ambitions could be the Russian people, said the study, which pointed to evidence of deep public wariness about Moscow's foreign policy, including the 2014 invasion of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula, military support for Russian separatists, and the survey data compiled for the study by Thomas Sherlock, a professor at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, suggests relatively. Even Russian elites seem skeptical of Putin's strategy, the paper contends. While raindrop, truck top, smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.